Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of Bluegrass. You've enjoyed live Bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite Bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So our guest today on Got Grass is Mark Schatz. Mark played bass with so many great bluegrass bands over the years, including Tony Rice Unit, the Bluegrass Album Band, John Hartford, Tim O'Brien, Nickel Creek, and Claire Lynch. He tours as a duo with Brian McDowell, and he's playing with Bela Fleck's super band, My Bluegrass Heart. Mark is also an accomplished clawhammer banjo player, dancer, and storyteller. So welcome, Mark Schatz, to Got Grass.
Chris, thank you so much. Nice to be here with you today. Thanks for reaching out.
Sure. I usually start out with a simple non-music question, which is, if you had a day off with nothing on your schedule, how would you spend it?
A day off with nothing on my schedule. Well, I like playing music, so I would do some of that. Probably trail on the banjo, do some clawhammer for a while, and which usually involves playing some traditional tunes, maybe practicing some things that I need to work on for my duo with Brian McDowell, and then just kind of improvising and playing around. Sometimes I come up with a new tune when I do that, and might switch over to the bass, the string bass, and get out the bow. I often like to start with some arco bass. That's a bowed bass for folks that aren't in the kind of traditional standard classical music world, and then switch over to some pizzicato, that's plucking the bass, and do some scales. And again, it's kind of practicing as an exploratory. It's kind of a mixture of things, and it's an exploration, looking for just new melodies, ways to get around the instrument. When I switch over to the pits, I sometimes mess around with grooves, funky grooves or this and that, and try to increase my facility, try to get a little faster, do some slap bass, which I like to pull out from time to time. And lately, Chris, I've also been playing a good bit of guitar, flat picking, because I've always loved the guitar, and actually play a little bit in my show with Brian. And there's a song on our tune on our Grit and Polish CD that features me playing the guitar. And Brian actually likes my rhythm guitar playing, which is quite a compliment from someone of his musical abilities. And
Right.
And then might read a book for a while, go outside, sit in the California sunshine.
Okay, so that's kind of what I was heading towards. I mean, I was kind of thinking on a day off from music, but you like to play music on your day off from music. You love music so much, you just like to relax by playing music.
Well, there's that, and it's as I said, I living now in Berkeley, California, and it's a nice place to ride a bike. I've got a great old classic of a bike. It's a Raleigh racer, about 50 years old, that I actually bought from Tom Rosem, which folks may know. Tom, he played for many years with Laurie Lewis, just down the road from me now. He sold me this bike. It's an old-fashioned 3-speed bike, and as long as I don't have to go up into the hills, the Berkeley Hills here, there's a lot of nice flat ground to ride on. I can go down to the bay and ride along the bay, and 3 speeds works pretty good.
Right. So you play the bass, which is a very physical instrument, as we all know, and you do a lot of dancing. Do you have a regimen of eating and exercise and relaxation that kind of keeps your body strong and limber as we age?
Well, Chris, as probably a lot of folks might say, I should. My regime is a bit sporadic. I do try to walk every evening, and kind of after the work's done, after I've kind of run out of steam for doing internet business and maybe some playing, I go out when things have quieted down on the street and I can kind of have my thoughts to myself. I take a 30 or 40 minute walk, and that's a I think that's very helps me sleep and kind of gets the blood pumping a little. And as you mentioned, I do some dancing as well, clogging, Appalachian clogging, and mixing a little bit of tap dance and some other things in there with it. And whenever I try to do that every 2 or 3 days, I've got some nice using a little board, 3 foot by 2.5 foot dance board that I built. It's raised up off the ground a little, so it's got a little bit of bounce to it and a little bit of thump. And I got some nice dance shoes, and so that's great exercise. I usually do that early in the day before starting other things. And when I do that, I usually do some stretching as well, which I think is really, some people say doing stretching is more important and helpful for your body than doing kind of weightlifting and things. I think a good combination of all that stuff is good. But so, I try to, again, I'm getting older here, Chris, and as they say, use it or lose it. So I try to stay active, and my exercise is a little intermittent, but some of these things I do with more regularity.
Gotcha. So was the bass your first instrument as a growing up, or when you get into music? Did you play
I
bass?
first instrument I played formally was the cello, because in fourth grade, where I was growing up in Lexington, Massachusetts, they offered stringed instruments in the fourth grade in the public schools and wind instruments in the fifth grade. So I had some aptitude. There was a piano in our house when I was growing up that I used to bang on a little bit and pick out little melodies. I never got to be much of really any kind of piano player. But when the opportunity to take some lessons came up at school, I thought I'd like to play. And to tell you the truth, I didn't know much about the different instruments, the violin, viola, cello, which is all they offered in fourth grade. They didn't offer any bass, I guess, because our hands were still on the small side. And my mother actually said, "Well, I like the cello," so I chose the cello and enjoyed it and really liked playing in the school orchestra, playing with people. And I don't think I was never kind of obsessed with the instrument, or I think as you need to be to get really good at it. I kind of did enough to get by with my lessons. And then I think at the end of eighth grade, I was in the music room at my middle school, and there's a bunch of instrument, closets all around the walls. And I was with a friend in there looking in the closets and found a bass in one of those closets. And I went, "Well, this is cool." And as it turned out, one of the teachers there had been a bass player, and she started, Miss Cavallari. I actually remember her name. She started giving me some bass lessons, and was thrilled that I was taking some interest in it. And when I got to high school, a year later, there were a lot of cello players and not many bass players. So I switched over to bass and took lessons and played in the school orchestras. And so that kind of got me started. Another year into high school, a friend of mine said, "Hey, let's start a rock and roll band." And he had been a saxophone player. And when I was playing the cello, he would play the sax and I would play the cello. And we would, do songs like the Beatles' Yesterday and things like that. And when we got to high school, we said, "Well, let's do something more cool." So he switched over to guitar. I switched over to electric bass. And we and a couple other friends started a high school rock band. We played really loud, mostly down in my basement. But we got out and played a few gigs here and there.
Right.
So that was kind of the start of it.
Yeah. I was talking with Missy Raines recently, and she said that the bass that her parents bought her as a teenager is the only bass she's ever played. Do you have a favorite bass that you've had since way back then, or do you have a bunch of
Uh,
them?
yeah, I do. I was using the school bass for many years. And then I guess when I got out of high school and went off to college, I bought a plywood bass and had plywood bases for a while. And maybe I had one that was spruce top, plywood back and sides. And a luthier that did work for me in the Boston area when I took one of these basses to him to work on, he said, "Hey, I've got a bass I think you might like." This this actually would have been years later because I know the first when I got done with college and started playing professionally, the first basses I had were still the plywood basses, and uh, and so it must have been about 1980 or something. I guess even into playing with Spectrum, I think I was still playing the plywood basses. So it must have been around 1980, 81, 82, somewhere in there. This luthier's, I still would see him when I went back to Boston. He said, "I got a bass I think you'd like." And he showed me a bass. And to tell you the truth, I didn't know much about basses. I didn't really couldn't tell this is a good tone or not a good tone, but I trusted him and bought that bass from him. In fact, my grandmother, who was still alive at the time, whose name was Rosalie, um, who was pretty musical herself, she said, "I want to help you buy that bass." So she helped finance it. And so I call that bass the Rosalie bass. And you know what? That is still, I've had a lot of other basses and do now, and they're kind of situated in different places in the country for convenience sake. One's in Nashville, one's in Maryland. But the Rosalie bass, I've tried finding other basses that are better, and I've just always come back to this one, and I love it. And So yeah, this is came to me kind of early in my career, and I played on many kind of classic recordings with this. The stuff I did with Tony Rice, Tim O'Brien, Claire Lynch. Most of it was done on with this bass.
My mom played a stride piano, and I grew up listening to jazz. So one of my favorite artists was Oscar Peterson Trio with Ed Thigpen and Ray Brown. And still is. I think you can't really beat that group for any kind of swing.
Oh,
What
Ray
was your?
Brown. Yeah,
Did you listen to that stuff growing up, jazz too, or?
you know, Chris, I didn't. I kind of came to some degree of appreciation for jazz. Well, I was going to say later in life, but I actually played in a jazz kind of a big band jazz band in high school. I played the bass. You know, we were playing, you know, horns and uh, drums, and so I guess I played some of that with them, but I was not a huge enthusiast back then. I think my real understanding of jazz only started to happen when I spent a year studying at Berklee College of Music in Boston, and and there, you know, that first year, it's kind of a technical. I call it a technical school of pop music. It's very jazz and pop oriented, and I got a really good kind of working man's knowledge and understanding of jazz changes, articulations, and that kind of thing. And I think probably at that point started listening more. I'm not a avid jazz fan. I love it. I love swinging and playing it. I wouldn't, if someone called me for a jazz gig, don't know if I would do it. I don't think of myself as a jazz player.
Yeah.
I can get around some changes and can, you know, kind of the standards and love swinging and love that feel. But that's a very deep well and takes a tremendous amount of facility, harmonic understanding, which, like I said, I have some of. But and that's great that you grew up in that kind of environment, hearing that all the time. I wish I'd heard more of that growing up. I think most of the music I heard around our house was, you know, on Sundays when my folks would turn on the radio and they'd play classical music. And of course, other than that, I just was listening to what was on the radio, really.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So you went to Berkeley for a year. Then did you go right into playing in a band after that? Did you become a professional musician right after that, or?
No, I actually I got my degree from Haverford College, which is
Huh.
a small liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia. And out of high school, I went there and studied for 2 years. And then it was not uncommon at that time to take a year off between sophomore and junior years and just do something different. So I
Mhm.
moved back to Lexington, Massachusetts, where I had grown up, and went to Berkeley for that year. That was the year I spent there, and it was a very formative year. For one thing, of course, like I said, I got a good kind of basic understanding of jazz. But I also, when I left Haverford, I left as an anthropology major. And I
Ah,
mean, I love music, but I just, I never thought, well, I could really do this full time. I just never kind of imagined that. And but that year at Berkeley, I played with an international folk dance group in Cambridge called Mandala. And the following summer, played out on the street with a couple different groups. Um, and I just loved the performing. Uh,
mhm.
and when I actually went back to Haverford and finished up there, but went back and changed my degree to music. And, it was a more standard kind of music theory and composition program. Uh, and, uh, and then it wasn't too long after getting out of college that I got a job with the Boston-based band Tasty Licks, which included the up-and-coming banjo player Bela Fleck. I had gotten to know Bela kind of in the last couple of years when I was at Haverford. I would come back to the Boston area pretty regularly because I had a sweetheart there, and he was at an old-time music jam session,
Mhm.
and just playing the melodies and not doing anything fancy because he was, Bela was always hungry for new stuff and interested in it. And I think at the end of the jam, I said, "Hey, do you ever kind of improvise over the fiddle tunes and things?" Which I thought was really the cool thing to do at the time. I think he got a little sparkle in his eye. He said, "Yeah, I do that sometimes."
Ah,
I was
ah,
playing, I guess, mandolin really at that time. Maybe that's what I had at the jam session. So we started playing Soldier's Joy or something, and he went off into these unbelievable waves of improvisational wonder. My jaw dropped. I went, "Oh yeah, yeah, you can do
ah.
that stuff, can't you?" And we got to be friends, and we would get together and actually play jazz standards together with me on the mandolin and him on the banjo, because that was something he was studying at the time, and he just wanted someone to go through some of the tunes in the real book with. So
Right.
I, with my little bit of knowledge that I'd gotten from Berkeley, I was able to kind of figure out some basics, changes, how to play the chords on the mandolin. And we trade solos back and forth. And after I got done with college, and his band Tasty Licks was looking for a bass player, and I got the gig that way. And it started
Nice.
a very fruitful relationship and long-term relationship with him.
Nice. Okay, so at some point, you played with Bela Fleck and his band, and then at some point, did you get a hold of Tony Rice, or did he get a hold of you to play with him at some point after that, or how did that work out?
That was several years later. I mean, after a couple different stints in bands with Bela. As I said, my first real professional job was in that Boston-based Tasty Licks. That Jack Tottle was actually the leader of that band, and Pat Enright was in it at the time.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so it was a pretty. They had been kind of a progressive bluegrass band, but with Pat joining the band, it headed in a more traditional direction, and that was my first kind of hit of bluegrass, which was great. And of course, Pat is a wonderful, incredible singer and rhythm guitar player. After that, Bale and I went down to Lexington, Kentucky, and performed with. We're in a band called Spectrum for a couple of years,
Right.
based out of there, and then he got a call from Newgrass Revival and moved down to Nashville to play with them. Several months later, I moved down there myself to pursue a kind of country music thing. Got an electric bass, um, and I had some skills from those high school rock and roll uh, days, and but I needed to learn this whole new kind of genre of music and learn the repertoire, and would play in
Right.
any would play in any crappy bar band I could find just to get a chance to play the stuff, and was starting to make a little bit of headway uh, when
Then, so yeah, you were saying moving down to Kentucky and playing bluegrass and learning that whole new kind of genre.
I moved to Kentucky, uh, and when I got down there, I was heard a lot more country music, and that's when I kind of started getting more of a bit of an interest in that, and uh, especially some of the, uh, just the great uh, classic country singers. And also listening to Emmylou Harris was informative for my own bass playing. I think it was Emery Gordy playing bass on a lot of those recordings. Just wonderful bass lines, which I
Right. Yep.
kind of learned and applied to some of the bluegrass stuff that I was doing. And also just the incredible feel of that music was inspiring. And so I played with Spectrum for a couple of years, maybe 80 to 81. And Bela got a call from Newgrass Revival. He quit Spectrum and went down to Nashville to play with them. And a few months later, I followed him down there and got the electric bass out of the mothballs and started trying to learn to play country music. And would play in any little crappy little bar I could, just get a chance to do that. And I remember one one gig was at a place called I think it was called the Starlight Lounge on Dickerson Road. Anybody who knows about Nashville knows that's kind of a rough area down there. And we'd play Fridays and Saturday nights from 9 o'clock at night till 5 o'clock in the morning. And for, I think, $35 a night. And that was good. It was a pretty good place to cut your teeth. And they're actually pretty decent players to play with. I mean, there are a lot of good players in Nashville, obviously. And
Sure.
And you had asked about when I heard from Tony Rice. It was a couple of years into my time in Nashville. That thing is still dinging, isn't it?
Still going. Yeah. Well, whatever.
Let me ask her not to send messages.
Let me stop this. Just keep going.
So I was freelancing in Nashville, trying to get up and running in kind of the country music world, and I think was starting to make a little bit of headway. I actually got a gig with Pam Tillis, who's a great singer, songwriter. Of course, Mel Tillis's daughter, and this was kind of I felt like, well, I'm kind of on my way here. And right about that time, it was, I guess, 1985, I got a call from Jimmy Gaudreau, who had been in the band Spectrum with Bela and me and Glenn Lawson when we in Lexington before we both moved to Nashville. And he said, "Hey, I'm playing some shows with Tony Rice, and he's doing a couple of East Coast things. And I guess Todd Phillips had been playing with Tony most of the time up till then. He said, Todd can't make it out. Do you want to play the Birchmere with us? A couple nights at the Birchmere, which is kind of one of the really premier bluegrass venues in the country. It was located in Alexandria, Virginia." And I said, "Tony Rice, yeah, that sounds exciting." So I went up there, played the shows with them, and it was fantastic. And Tony called me sometime a week or two later and said, "Hey, you want to play another show with me?" And my focus had been I had so much on this country music thing and starting to make a little bit of headway there that I said, "Well, Tony, I loved it. I'm kind of starting to just get my feet on the ground in this country music been trying to do." And he was incredibly chill, I got to say, because someone of his, profile, if he calls someone and they say, "Well, I'm, trying to do some other things," that would have been the last call that he made to that person.
Right.
But Tony, Tony's a different kind of guy. And he said, when I play with Grisman, the way we operated was he'd call us up, and if we were available, we'd go do the gig, which was, news to me. And he said, "I'll call you. And if you're available, come play." As it happened over the next, few months, when he'd call, I was always available. And after about half a dozen gigs, the kind of light went off in my head and went, "Wait a second. What am I trying to do here in my musical life? What was I trying to do with the country music thing?" I said, "I want to play with someone where there's some really good singing, because I love playing behind a good singer. And if there's some good picking going on, that would be a bonus." And, I wanted to go out on the road with some country singer. And I thought, here's this incredible singer, incredible playing. this is satisfying that desire and that goal. It's just in a little different direction. And and to be honest, it was actually my old friend Bela who at one point said to me, I see you're playing electric bass and working on the country music uh, venture. He said, but you got a certain niche as an upright player that I think you shouldn't take for granted. And and so sure enough, this directed me kind of back toward the acoustic music again, which, to be honest, is where my heart always was. So it was just kind of karma, and worked then with Tony for another 5 years, 85 till around 90, and became his road manager. And it was played on some great records. It was an amazing experience, really.
Did you ever play electric bass with him, or was it always acoustic?
No, it was always acoustic. There was never
Yeah.
any question of that.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I just thought I'd ask.
I mean, on a
Um,
couple of the records that I played on with him, um, they used a rhythm section from DC, and I think there was some electric bass on a couple of those cuts. But that was, a certain group of players that were kind of playing together. Maybe guys, it might have been guys that were playing with Mary Chapin Carpenter at the time. So it was, like the whole rhythm section. But no, I never played any electric, never imagined doing that with him.
yeah, yeah, I wouldn't think so. I mean, that's interesting. You mentioned that he would call you up and say, "Can you play the gig?" Because I think, from what my understanding with him, he played here a few times, and I talked to a bunch of his musicians, and that was the way he always operated. He would just say, "I have a gig in Connecticut on this date. Can you make it?" And if they said yes, he'd say, "Well, meet me there at this time." They'd all drive up separately. They'd meet, no rehearsal, no set list. They'd play, and they'd all go home. Which is a
This was in the his later years, right?
Yeah, this was in the 2000s when I first met him, and he did 4 shows up here in the
Yeah,
2000s.
it kind of uh, turned into a somewhat anarchic situation like that. I mean, I've mentioned that I became Tony's road manager, and when I was with him until the very very end, Keith Case was booking him.
Right.
So it wasn't Tony calling me anymore. It was me being in communication with Keith as the agent, and he would say, "Hey, we got this tour." I mean, I'm sure Keith got things approved with Tony, but it wasn't Tony calling me for the gigs anymore. I just get the whatever the tour was with from Keith, and then I would do all the advance work and send people an itinerary. I said, "Okay, here's how we're going to get there. Here's who's flying where and when. Here's the hotel." And but I did, after years of not playing with him, I did do a few shows with him in that time period you were just referring to, and it
Hmm.
was back to kind of that, there'd be a call, and it was pretty loose, and that was generally not the way I like to operate. I like to know what's going on, how I'm getting there, and so I guess that's what it devolved into, and
Yeah.
and
I
I
mean, I
guess
would
it
have.
worked for him.
Yeah, I guess it did. I imagine that probably caused some consternation among certain band members over the years. That probably led to some friction. The fact that everything was so loosey goosey, and there were, it was just, I don't know. It's hard to if you're a professional musician, it's hard to run your life based on I'll call you, and if you can come, you play. That
Yeah,
must be hard
it
for a lot of
was too
people.
it was too loose for me. There were get it kind of toward the end of the my tenure with him. It must have been around 1990 or so. There were some members of the band that wanted things more loosey goosey, and and it was and Tony didn't seem to be resistant to that at the time,
Mhm.
and so I was a little disenchanted with that, and uh, there was probably a little more drinking going on with Tony, and I was a
Yeah.
little disenchanted with that. And that's when the opportunity with Tim O'Brien presented itself, and I thought, well, it's going to take something pretty. I always thought it was going to take something pretty significant to uh, tempt me to leave the incredible music of Tony Rice, and with some of these things going on in the group administratively and so on and so forth, uh, when Tim quit Hot Rise to pursue his RCA deal, and then the O Boys, I called him up and said, "Hey, I'm interested in playing with you. Love your music, blah blah blah." So that was kind of the end of my formal playing with Tony as part of the unit, and went to work with Tim.
Or, I mean, Tony Rice was my musical hero of all the music I ever listened to, and still is. And he was the one who kind of got me into doing these shows. I decided to see if I could get him to come play in 2008, and I was talking to Lee Olson at Keith Case's office then, and we agreed on the deal. And somebody called me who had played with him a lot, and it might have been Jimmy Goudreau. I don't remember. He said, you're making a big mistake here. Tony is not going to show up, and blah 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 blah. You shouldn't be doing this. But I found Tony to be so friendly, appreciative, and easy to get along with, and just a sweetheart of a guy. Um, so my experience with him was completely amazing and positive, despite all the warnings I got. You know,
Well, I Tony had that side to him, affable, friendly, um, unpretentious, generous spirited. He was funny. He had a good sense of humor. Um, I mean, and in the time that I worked with him, he always got to the gig and always played, and did his job in a in a workmanlike fashion. And I agree. He's what an amazing quantity. He was magic, and going back and listening to the stuff I played on with him and other Tony Rice recordings, it just it became more and more kind of clear to me. I mean, he could just stand in front of you, and the tone he would get out of a few notes on the guitar had like an emotional effect. It was just so. And I'm glad. So I'm glad you had a positive experience with him. Things, as the years progressed, and he was not singing anymore and having more kind of physical problems with his hands and arms. I think his behavior got a little more erratic, and sometimes I think would not show up to things. And so, but he was a complicated dude. In fact, I don't know if you've heard of this new book that just came out about him.
I have.
Called Discovering Tony Rice.
I have, yes.
Kind of have you read it?
I've only heard an interview with the author. I haven't actually read it yet, but it's on my my to-do list for sure.
Right. It's kind of a deep dive into Tony Rice, uh, the guy, and the great stuff and the difficult stuff, with interviews by not a huge number of people, but people that really knew him well and loved him and made music with him. And fortunately, I was one of the people that the author, Bela Fleck, called up and had a section in that book as well. And it's it'll give you a pretty broad picture of Tony.
Yeah, I actually like to interview Bill on this podcast at some point because I was fascinated by his conversation that I heard about the book.
Yeah, that'd be great. He's a warm, articulate guy, and I think he'd make I mean, I always enjoyed the interview process, and we went back and forth a good bit when he was writing the book, and he'd send me a kind of rough draft. I'd make some suggestions, some of which he took, some he didn't, but he was always respectful, and I had a good rapport with him.
One of my earlier podcasts was with Todd Phillips, so we did talk a bit about his time with Tony and Grisman and all that stuff. It was interesting. His take was quite interesting too. But similar, Tony was a complicated guy who had moods, and that's just what it was.
Yeah, Todd probably knew him as well as anybody. Spent a lot of time with him, and so that would have been pretty good source for Tony stories.
I'm going to change the tone here a little bit, and this is a question I hear discussed all the time by musicians. So when you're playing with a band, in a bluegrass band, the tempo and the groove is always kind of changing and moving slow and fast a little bit. So, as a bass player, do you try and keep the beat steady and kind of hope the band comes back to you, or do you have to constantly adjust your playing as the tempo changes or speeds up, or how does that all work? It's an interesting philosophical discussion I had with many musicians about this.
Well, yeah, there are many discussions about this, and you're saying things slow down and speed up. I mean, in a good bluegrass band with good players, I say a lot of people refer to this as the music breathes some,
Right.
and I don't think this is just true for bluegrass and acoustic music. I think it's true for all music. And from a from a player's point of view, you might not even necessarily notice it speeding up, slowing down. And from a listener's point of view, you probably would not notice that as either,
Right.
because usually those things are happening as part of the overall um, landscape of the piece of music you're playing. You know, it comes into a hot solo, there might be a little rhythmic surge there. It might, but it's going to be pretty imperceptible, and it's just really going to be felt as energy. Or things quiet down, you know, it might pull back a little bit. And again, it's not as I'm as a player when I'm playing that, I'm not thinking, oh, let's speed up here to give this a little more of a bump. It's just, you know, you lean in a little, and
Right.
and sometimes if you get a metronome going, you say, oh, look, this picked up a little bit here, and so and you know, with I mean, what's important to me is how the groove feels, and that's this kind of magical thing that just happens when you know, people play together, and you know, the right kind of people who are playing, doing the right thing.
Or right. So, did you have, obviously, you came to bluegrass probably a little later in your career than a lot of the people I've talked to on this podcast. Did you have bluegrass heroes, and did you ever have you gotten to play with all of them through your career? Or do you still have people you want to play with that haven't yet in bluegrass or any other kind of music? I guess would be a question.
Well, you know, I know bluegrass heroes. I mean, a lot of bluegrass heroes are some of, you know, just the uh, classic. I mean, from the early great bluegrass musicians onward. I mean, I'm a huge Bill Monroe fan, and Stanley Brothers, um, and Jim and Jesse, and you know, the Osborne brothers, Jimmy Martin. I mean, those are all kind of heroes. All had really um, unique takes on the music, and contributed their own, you know, kind of color. And I just love all that stuff. I mean, and there's, you know, the great players, of course. And I've uh, fortunately had the great good fortune to be able to play and do some recording with some of the people that are my kind of favorite bluegrass players. You know, they're the I don't know if this is third generation guys, Sam Bush and Jerry Douglas, and Bela, Stuart Duncan, Mark O'Connor, uh, Tony, of course, Brian Sutton, uh, and you know, a lot of great players that maybe not as well known as them. Charlie Cushman on the banjo, Tom Adams on the banjo, Mark Delaney, banjo player. I mean, great player. I don't know how you kind of define a hero. I mean, I haven't gone out of my way to try to looking to play with my heroes necessarily, but I have in my journey had the opportunity to do that, um, and been blessed really. I mean, as I said, people played with Tony John Hartford. He's a hero of mine. Got to play with him. Um, Bela has always been. I think he's just Bela's one of our great American musicians. I mean, aside from bluegrass music, and it's fortunate that, you know, he's gone off an incredible flights of fancy in so many directions, and a lot of places that I would never be able to follow or keep up. But he loves the bluegrass
Yep.
and acoustic music, and keeps coming back to it from time to time, as evidenced by My Bluegrass Heart.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that I can, the kind of skills that I have and sensibility can uh, be make me a candidate to play that stuff with him. And out with the band that you mentioned earlier, the My Bluegrass Heart Band, which is the kind of primary configuration is Michael Cleveland and Brian Sutton, Bela, me, Sierra Hull, and Justin Moses. Just every night on tour with them, I'm jaws for the incredible playing that's going on. So, of course, Chris Thiele. They got the younger generation, Cats, and Noam Pekelny, and I've had a chance to play with these folks now and then. Some of them I've been in bands with, and then Tim O'Brien, of course, one of my favorite players. This is one of my favorite musicians. What a singer, what a songwriter, and his playing is incredible. It was, a gift to play with him and the O-Boys from '90 to '98, and so I don't know. It's a kind of a long, rambling answer to your question about my bluegrass heroes. I've felt lucky to play with those folks that I've that fate has brought me together with, and I just love a lot of other players. I guess heroes. Ricky Skaggs is a big hero of mine. I would love to have a chance to play with him someday. But then my musical heroes also expand beyond, the bluegrass world. I'm a big Bonnie Raitt fan. Then, boy, if I could play a few tunes with Bonnie at some point, that would make my day, would make my life. Speaking of heroes outside the bluegrass world, I did have an incredible opportunity many years ago to play with Linda Ronstadt, who was one of my favorite singers ever. And she was, at the time, she pretty much in retirement. She was living in outside of Tucson, Arizona. And I got a call from John Starling, who folks, of course, would know as the lead singer for the kind of original Seldom Seen band. And he was good friends with Linda. And it turns out that every Mother's Day, she would do a weekend of shows at her daughter's Waldorf school to as a benefit to make some money for the school. And so John put an acoustic band together with her, which was Carl Jackson singing harmony and playing guitar, Sam Bush on fiddle and mandolin, and John on guitar, and me. And I think Linda's nephew played the cello and some things, but that was the core of the band. And so we went out there a couple days early and rehearsed. And I'll tell you what, the first time we were in a little, kind of one of the rooms, a little building at her hacienda, and I remember the light was kind of filtering into the room, and the dust was kind of making this magical kind of aura in there. And she opened up, started singing, and it just was, wow, to be in the room with that voice was made my heart burst. And we did that weekend of stuff, and it was just a really rare, wonderful experience. And I've been lucky to play with some people that I think are fantastic. So musical heroes. Roy Husky.
That's a wonderful answer. I mean, you really have covered so many, and you've been very poetic in some of your language. That's a great answer to that question. So
I should,
if you want to add more, you can. But I mean,
one other guy I wanted to mention. There were two people that were kind of maybe major bass influences for me. One of them was Edgar Meyer, who moved to Nashville. He was a prodigy classical bass player, but he was a big fan of acoustic music and wanted to play with Sam Bush and Jerry Douglas and Bela and Mark O'Connor and those guys. And he moved, instead of to one of the big classical cities like New York or LA or Chicago, he moved to Nashville. He said, I want to play with these guys. And sure enough, he became friends with them. made music with them, and it became really amazing pollination of the kind of acoustic and kind of classical forms. But it was his bowing that killed me. It was the first time I heard him, and he was playing behind some singers. I remember him playing on a few cuts with a gal named Kathy Chiavala, who was a wonderful
Yeah.
singer
Yep.
that I worked with in Nashville. And I went, wow, listen to what the arco bass is doing with on this, acoustic, this behind the singer songwriter. And I got really inspired to work on my bowing and try to get just a beautiful sound out of the bass. Of course, again, from a facility point of view, he's got more on the little tip of his little finger than I'll ever have. But I worked on it and got better at it, and so that was a big inspiration to me. And the other guy was Roy Husky Jr., kind of the opposite of Edgar. He's the guy that played, but also musical genius, old school bass player. Just played plywood basses and played really hard at this great big left hand and had very unconventional kind of left hand position. But this guy's sense of time was was incredible. Some people are born with that metronome. I heard somebody call it an atomic clock. It's they know where that beat is. Boom, 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 and when he played, whatever he played with, whoever he played with, or whatever recording he was on, the music kind of floated. It just kind of got this wonderful motion forward, no pushing, no pulling, just incredibly settled in. It made it just feel good. And I thought, that's how I want to make music feel. That's what I want to be able to do. And I remember he would guffaw. He was a very unpretentious dude. And I'd, compliment him on his playing. He said, "Oh man, I don't do any of the fancy stuff that you do." And I went, "Oh gosh, Roy, you don't have to." And the thing is, I heard him. He could swing. He could play reggae stuff. I heard him. He played a lot with Peter Rowan, all the kind of interesting grooves that Peter had. He could do all that stuff. And but it was always just such a great feel. And I was very fortunate to have him play in my first solo CD, Brand New Old Time Way. That it was my first kind of venture, playing my own tunes and playing a lot of clawhammer banjo, which I have a passion for. And Bela produced that record. And when he and I were talking about who was going to play on what, I just presumed I would play the bass and the banjo, both. I was a pretty good bass player. And Bela said, this music feels the best when everybody's playing together. All the instruments are there. And he said, you're going to be featured on the banjo, and played a little mandolin on that CD as well. Let's find a bass player to play on it. And Roy was my first choice. And he sure enough made all that stuff feel so good. And it was Bela's idea for us to come up with a little bass duet, which we did. And he would smoke these little cigarillos, and in the middle of recording this tune, we went out on the front porch of my Nashville house and smoked one together. So I ended up calling that tune Stogies. A fun, really playful duet with the two of us.
Yeah. It's funny because I only play amateur bluegrass. I lead bluegrass jams and stuff. And the bass somehow always seems to be neglected as being the important instrument in a bluegrass band. But in my feeling is that when the bass player is really good and has a really good sense of rhythm and groove, that it just is the most important thing in the band. Like, you can have a great mandolin player or banjo player, but if the bass player isn't feeling it and leading it, it just, to me, falls apart. And I just feel like bass players are the key.
Well,
I'm not just saying that because you're a bass player, but
pat myself on the back and say I wouldn't disagree with you. But to add to that, yeah, when there's a good bass player, it helps pull everything together. In fact, I knew this interesting cat who lived in the Shenandoah Valley, who was a very influential banjo player in the early days. His name was Rooster Ruley. His specialty was actually fixing car air conditioners. But I got to know Rooster a little bit, and we were talking about the groove that you're talking about, and he was giving me some compliments, and I was saying, well, thanks a lot. He said, no, man, you sew the whole mess together. It was one of the most colorful and and complimentary things anyone ever said about me. And so, of course, I mean, the truth is, bluegrass and acoustic, any kind of music really, it's only as good as the sum of its parts. So I can't create a great groove. If there's a good groove happening, I can help make it feel better, and I can get in there and add a good element. But if any one of those guys, whether it's the guitar player or the mandolin player, people that are kind of playing more, doing rhythmic roles, if any of them are not not doing their thing right, it's gonna pull the thing apart, and there's nothing I could do to fix it. That's. But I appreciate you saying that about the bass player. It makes me it makes me think of a little joke sometimes. I tell folks, I say, the bass player stands in the back and doesn't get a whole lot of attention or glory, maybe, but look at it this way: he or she gets paid more per note than any other player in the band.
I haven't heard that one. That's very good.
There you go.
Perfect.
That's you can credit me with that one.
Okay. I may tell it at one of my concerts. That's a good one. Thank you. So you've developed a very strong emotional connection, I think, with your audiences, with dancing and storytelling and your personality. Is that a choice you made or make to give your audience so much of yourself? I mean, a lot of musicians just play and sign a few things and go home. You seem like you give so much of yourself in performance.
Well, when I'm playing as part of a band, if it's cooking, which fortunately most of the bands I've been able to play with have been pretty darn good bunch of musicians, that just makes me feel good. I kind of go into another world, It's like when the tune starts, it's like time stops. I mean, I don't mean like the time 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like you just go into another reality, and it's a wonderful place, and I express, I think those feelings, you can kind of see that in my demeanor for folks that have seen me perform. They say, "Oh, you look so happy when you're playing," and I'm not necessarily trying to put it out, Now there's times you want to like put it out there to the audience, but I'm just feeling good about what I'm doing and happy to be in that moment, and kind of giving it everything I have. Now, in terms of connecting with an audience, it's something I've always loved to do, and I've always had a little bit of a knack for that, but not that much. Excuse me, not that much opportunity as the bass guy in the back. Usually whoever is the leader of the band, whether it's Claire or Tim O'Brien or Bela, they're going to be out front, as the MC, kind of directing traffic, talking to the audience, and I may get a little moment when I come up to a mic and say something. But as you mentioned earlier, I've been playing with a duo for the last few years with Brian McDowell, and also initiated a kind of a solo, tried to do some playing by myself also. It was actually Tony Trischka that I saw was one of the recording sessions for Bela's My Bluegrass Heart record, when there was a banjo trio on one of those numbers. And Tony was there, and we were just recording at Bela's house, and we were both upstairs just kind of chatting. He said, have you ever thought about doing a solo show? And I said, well, it never crossed my mind, to tell you the truth. I'd always been such a band-oriented guy. he said, well, you play a lot of different instruments and tell stories and jokes and things. He said, I've been doing some solo stuff, and it was a little awkward at first, but I got better at it, and maybe you should try it. So the idea kind of knocked around inside my head. Excuse me. And I think it was after my, sorry, I'm going to take a little drink of water here. After my wife of many years passed away in 2019, I was kind of at loose ends. And one of the things that was amazing about her name was Eileen Carson Schatz, is her level of engagement with an audience, with other people, with the world around her. She'd stop, we'd be for a walk, and she'd go for a walk, she'd stop and say, hey, look at this plant, look at this flower, I wonder what this is. So that was always amazing to me. And after she passed away, I thought a lot about that, and I thought, I would like to have some of that kind of engagement with people. And I think going forward with my music, I think I'd like to find a way to do that more. And so between what Tony had suggested a few months earlier and these circumstances, I started putting a solo show together, and did a handful of those before the pandemic hit, and loved, being, it's a challenge when everything's on you, but right. I loved the interaction with the audience, and have been able to pursue that as well with the duo with Brian. The two of us kind of share MC duties, but it's about, having they talk about the fourth wall. It's kind of where you're performing kind of behind this imaginary wall. And for me, that's all about breaking that fourth wall, just engaging with people, and kind of having that more of an exchange of energy. Right. And so I flourish with that. I like it. I like connecting with people. And so, I've been trying to, in some of these ways, I've had the opportunity to do that recently. And I should mention that I think I mentioned earlier, I'm living in Berkeley now, and I actually just got engaged to a new sweetheart, Lisa Berman.
Congratulations, man. That's so nice. That's such nice news.
Thank you very much. And two of us been making some music together. She's a graphic designer, but quite a good musician as well. Kind of the same kind of music that I do, kind of the folk, bluegrass, old time stuff. So that's been wonderful, and that will be another opportunity to again do some of this more personal kind of interaction with audiences.
Wow, that's great news. That's very nice.
Thank you.
Just talk a little bit about clogging. Where does the dance come from, and how did you get into that?
Well, the clogging is one of one of our American forms of what's called percussive dance. Percussive dance is any kind of dance where you're making sounds with your feet or with your body without an instrument. And there are percussive dances all over the world. And the American forms are clogging and tap, kind of roughly. Excuse me. Clogging sometimes is known by other names: flat-footing, buck dancing, and there are some differences between these kind of different styles, kind of, but the more generic term I think is clogging, and it is it comes out of the great American melting pot, like every other American music and tradition does, musical forms. A lot of folks, particularly from the British Isles, when they emigrated to this country, a lot of them moved to the southeastern part of the United States. I think because those rolling hills kind of reminded them of where they came from. And they brought their dance and music traditions with them. including the fiddle tunes, the songs, and there were percussive dance that they did back in the old country. There was a traditional style of Irish dance called sean-nós, which actually I think translates Gaelic, which I think just translates into old style. It kind of looks like clogging a little bit, and then there were percussive dances that came from England as well. There was the English clog dances, which are actually done in the wooden shoes. The wooden shoes were what the miners wore, the coal miners, to protect their feet. And, a lot of traditions use whatever things they have around them, dance traditions particularly. And so the English clogging kind of evolved. And there were actually English clogging teams that were part of the vaudeville circuit, medicine shows in the late 19th, early 20th century. And I'm sure they were African Americans. Oh, anyways, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. These folks came to the Southern Appalachian Mountains where they interacted with Native Americans who had their own dance forms, and African Americans who, part of the terrible part of our history, who were brought here as slaves, and came from traditions with lots of dance and percussion, and the music started to change and evolve in those mountains, and gave birth to, jazz and blues and clogging and old time music and bluegrass music, and so, and the clogging kind of came out of that, primarily out of that area, and I got involved with it, going back in this interview, when I was in Boston for that year studying at Berkeley, and was working with that folk dance group Mandala. They were an international folk dance group, so they did dancers from all over the world. And one of the things they did was a clogging suite. They had learned some clogging. And I saw that dancing and I went, that's cool. I had done some Israeli folk dancing when I was a kid at summer camp, and I liked dancing. I had, some aptitude for it and love for it. And I also liked percussion. I liked banging on things. In fact, when I was a kid, I thought I might be a drummer. I brought a little drum pad and a couple of drumsticks and paddled on that a little bit. So when I saw this kind of dancing where you were kind of part of the music because you were making sounds with your feet and also moving around, I just thought that was the cat's meow. And so I got those dancers to teach me some steps. I took a really great workshop from a guy who came up from Asheville, North Carolina, named Glenn Bannerman, who had a really great way of teaching clogging, which I still use some of his techniques when I teach clogging workshops to this day. And after that, wherever I ended up in my life, I would seek out the cloggers. When I was in Kentucky, I found some folks that were kind of clogging in what's called some people refer to as the green grass clogger, fiddle puppet style of clogging, from the groups that performed. Some of the groups early groups, the green grass cloggers and fiddle puppets, kind of took it onto the stages. And I learned some stuff from them, some steps, some styles, and then I moved to Nashville and worked with a gal named Jackie Christian, who had learned from a fella out in Dixon. What was his name? I can't remember. He was an older gentleman. Golly, he called it buck dancing. And it was real kind of different stylistically from the clogging I had done before. And I worked on that, and that kind of informed my dancing. And then I started putting it on stage with some of the bands I was playing with. Now, never did do any dancing with Tony, but then when I started playing with Tim O'Brien, he put some of it on stage in his show, and with Claire, I put it on stage. I actually did some dancing with Nickel Creek as well. But then I met Eileen that I mentioned earlier, about '89, and she was the director of the group I mentioned, Fiddle Puppet Dancers, which later changed their name to Footwork's Percussive Dance Ensemble, and they were really one of the primo percussive dance groups in the country. And they had started off as a hot little clogging team, and then as they kind of did folk festivals and toured the circuit, they started seeing other kinds of percussive dance and incorporated that into their show until they did started doing theater shows, and they would do all kinds of percussive dance. And I learned some of that as well, but it was the clogging that was really informed and by my association with them. And they encouraged me to take it more seriously when I did it on stage, make sure I mic the floor so people can hear it. And I became the group's Footwork's musical director eventually, but I was always on and off the dance floor as I learned, a few of those numbers, a little bit of tap, French Canadian. I even learned some South African boot dance, gumboot dance. So, and I, if I'm in a jam session, then all the other instruments are taken up. I'll do some dancing. I love it, and it's prominently featured in the show I do with Brian. And whenever I play with folks, they hire me for a gig. I say, "Hey, you want some dancing? I'll be happy to get out there and do it." And more often than not, they said, "Yeah, sure," because it is. I mean, the fact is that this music, this bluegrass music, it was a lot of this groove comes from its being dance music. It was played for dancers, it's and a lot of the other traditions will have dancers, often have dancers as part of their act, and the bluegrass folks kind of got away from that to a large degree. I mean, there was a great clogging team on the Opry that would come out and do a number now and then, great dancers, but you didn't see Jim and Jesse or the Osborne brothers or Flat and Scruggs with the dancer out on stage. And maybe, I don't know, maybe because they saw it as too country or kind of hayseed, and, they're trying to be more presentable, whatever it was. It wasn't really part of the traditional bluegrass scene. And so my hat's off to the folks I played with that have said, yeah, put it out there. And it's a wonderful little kinetic moment in a show, and it's also, it's part of that tradition. So I think it fits in, and can actually do a little bit with Bela on the My Bluegrass Heart tours. Nice. And so he values it. Of course, his wife Abby is a clogger, and they've made that part of their performances as well. So I'm sure that maybe put a warm place in his heart, extra warm place for the for the clock. He's always been enjoyed that as well, and made a spot for it.
I guess Bill Monroe would occasionally do a little dancing on stage, but I think it was more just for kind of a little fun than.
Well, Bill was a good flat footer.
Right.
That's another word they use sometimes. He was great, and yeah, I've seen him dance more than once. And I think one of the bass players, maybe Chick Stripling for the Stanley Brothers, or maybe it was for Ralph, was quite a good dancer as well. And Ralph would feature him on a dance number. So it's part of the music, and I love it. And as I said way earlier on in this interview, I've got my dance board here with me, and got some nice custom-made dance shoes, and get that board out and dance. And I still work on it. I mean, I enjoy it, but like anything else, the more you work on it, the more you have it at your disposal when you need to throw it on stage. So that's the magic of the music and the dance.
Yeah. The influence and the mixture of black and white and slave and Appalachian traditions, both in dance and music, is a really huge, fascinating topic that maybe doesn't get enough attention. I know Monroe was taught by this supposedly like this black musician Doc Schultz, and I think bluegrass got kind of white and it kind of got away from its roots. I think, as you say, the kind of hillbilly, whatever mountain roots over time. But I think that whole mixture and influence of all these different cultures and music is just an amazing, fascinating story that hasn't been totally told yet.
It is. I'm really fascinated by that story. As I said earlier, for a while, a little brief while, I was an anthropology major before I switched over to music, and I'm always fascinated with where things come from, how they have evolved, and there's a ethnomusicology is a big uh, subject, and there's been a lot written about it. I mean, if you kind of search around, um, you can you can find that information. And of course, there are artists now that are make an effort to make those connections. Rhiannon Giddens is one of those, um, and kind of the black string band uh, influences. And yeah, it's African American music is a huge part, really, of almost every kind of American music, and certainly of the bluegrass. And yeah, it is. It's kind of an interesting thing that traditionally it's white guys playing it, and who are known for it.
Right.
And I mean, just even the banjo itself, which was originally, evolved from an African instrument. It's you don't, and I think because of the, you know, stereotypes and the ridicule that accompanied the minstrel music, a lot of African American people kind of didn't wanted to disassociate themselves from that
Right.
that music, that the banjo. It's kind of like it's a reminder of some uh, very tragic, horrible stuff in our history. And there are folks trying to uh, restore some of the respect and some of the love for the music, um, and attribute is the word, attribution, attribute it to those people, and maybe draw some of the African American community back in. Another guy who's been very active with that is Jake Blunt.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, he just played here actually a month or so ago, and yeah, he's amazing.
yeah,
Fabulous guy. Yeah.
and I know here in Berkeley, they're making real efforts to show attribute things to the music, to the African American influences, and it's kind of an important part of. They have an Berkeley Old Time Festival every year, and there's an effort to uh, educate and draw folks in. And there's some kind of banjo project going on here. I'm sorry, I don't know the Black Banjo Project, where I think African Americans are maybe making their own instruments and learning to play
Hmm.
banjo. So um, you know, there's moves in the right direction, and I am ever grateful to all of the kind of influences that have poured into me. Of course, the ham bone is another thing, definitely of African American origin, that I love to do. Another form of body, it's a form of body percussion.
Right.
Yeah, so that I do on my shows, loud and proud.
Well, that's just all fascinating stuff you've been talking about. I'm going to kind of wind it down here because we could go on for hours about this stuff. I think we're going to wind down with a question which everyone seems to find the most difficult, and it's a simple question, which is there anything that bluegrass fans would be surprised to learn about you in a non-musical sense? Like people mull over this and go, "Wow, I have no idea." So I don't know. Do you have anything to answer that question, or should we leave that for another time?
Hmm. Well, no, I like questions that make you think. um, Anything about me that the bluegrass folks would maybe not not be immediately cognizant of. Let's see. Well, I mean, for one thing, as I've mentioned a couple times, I'm now living on the West Coast, living in Berkeley. I was an East Coast guy all of my life, but met the gal I mentioned earlier, Lisa Berman.
Mm-hmm.
We've been friends for a while, and after my wife passed away, we started talking to each other, and it turned into a romance. And she's got a son; she couldn't leave here and move, so I came out here, and I'm turning into a kind of getting to love it out here. So that's something that maybe some of the bluegrass fans don't know about at this point, and still, I'll travel anywhere to play, but and get on a plane in a minute. But this is my home base now, and I don't know what other things.
Well, that's a very happy note to end on, I think, because you found after kind of a personal tragedy, you found love again out there, and what better way to end the interview? That makes me happy, and I'm sure it makes you happy. So let's just call that a great answer, Mark. And I'm just gonna say thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's really been a wonderful glimpse into your life and your views on things and your music. And I wish you all the best in your music and your relationship. And I hope to see you and Brian here in New England at some time soon.
Well, we love touring there. I've had some good experiences. And Chris, I really appreciate your reaching out, and thanks to the whole bluegrass community for listening in whenever this ends up getting aired. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks again, Mark. Talk soon. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.